The clock on the wall in here reads 3:47 a.m. I know that because I reset it last Tuesday using the GPS receiver I salvaged from one of the maintenance trucks, and I've been keeping it wound ever since. Before that, I was guessing at the time the way everyone guesses now. Watching light change through boarded windows, counting meals, counting the small sounds that come from outside at different hours. You learn things that way, not precise things, just impressions. The kind of impressions you can't testify to. Precision matters to me. It mattered before, in the job, and it matters now in a different way. Different stakes. Before, it was whether a camera feed was synced to within half a second of real time, whether the timestamp overlay on footage from the Millbrook overpass matched the server log, whether the PTZ housing on camera 4 Delta was oriented 3 degrees off from its programmed home position, which it always was, which I'd flagged 4 times in 18 months and which nobody ever fixed. Now it's whether the motion trigger I rigged on the south perimeter wire fires when something crosses it, and whether what crosses it has 2 legs or 4. Different stakes, same brain. I'm going to try to write this down properly, because I've been putting it off, and I think it's starting to cost me something, keeping it all inside my head. I don't know what it costs exactly. I just know that I've started to notice myself doing things, and then not being able to remember deciding to do them. Like last week, I dragged 3 highway barrier sections from the south lot without any conscious plan to do so. And when I came back in and looked at the notebook I'd been keeping my days in, I couldn't find any entry where I'd decided that was the thing to do. I just did it. The body figured it out while the mind was somewhere else. That scares me more than most things scare me now. So, the beginning. I need to give you the before part first, because if I don't, the rest of it doesn't mean what it means. When I was hired on with the State Department of Transportation 12 years ago, my title was Highway Systems Technician Level 2, and what that meant in practice was that I drove a white truck with a yellow light bar on the roof, and I went out in the dark and I climbed things. Poles, camera towers, junction boxes on bridge pylons. I carried a laptop bag and a toolkit and a set of diagnostic cables, and I fixed things that had stopped working, mostly in the hours between midnight and 6 in the morning, because that's when the traffic was thin enough to work safely on a shoulder. The overnight shift was considered the hard assignment. You got a 15% pay differential to work it, which sounds good until you understand what the overnight actually does to a person across years. It resets you the wrong way. Your body never fully adjusts. You're always slightly underwater, slightly behind. Eating breakfast food at what your stomach insists is dinner time. Watching sunrises through a windshield and feeling nothing particular about them. Your social life shrinks to people who work weird hours. Bartenders, nurses, guys at the 24-hour diner. You become specific to a version of the world that most people don't see. I liked it, honestly. That's the thing I want to be clear about. I'm not building up to some revelation about how lonely I was. I genuinely preferred working at night. I preferred the empty highways and the quiet radio chatter, and the way the city looked from a camera tower at 2 a.m., all those orange sodium lights strung out in grids as far as you could see, and almost nobody moving between them. I preferred the monitoring room when it was just me and the feeds, which it usually was on my shift. The overnight supervisor logged in remotely from home, and the other 2 techs who worked the graveyard slot were usually out in the field. I sat in the room with the screens. I watched the roads. I noted anomalies. I dispatched the field guys when something needed hands on it. I was good at noticing things. That's not bragging. It's just a fact about me the way it's a fact that I'm 5'10" and need reading glasses. Noticing things was what I did, and what I was built for. Which is why, when Camera 7 Bravo on the Route 19 corridor went dark at 3:58 a.m. on the night this started, I noticed it before the automated alert even fired. The monitoring room isn't impressive from the outside. Most people who've driven past the state DOT facility on Highway 9 in Callerton County probably don't know what the building is. It looks like a doubled-wide modular unit behind a chain-link fence, surrounded by the kind of equipment yard where you'd store road cones and jersey barriers and the machines that paint lines. The monitoring room itself is about the size of a generous double garage, drop ceiling, fluorescent lights that flicker when the HVAC kicks on, A long counter with workstations running the length of one wall, and above the counter, the screens. 27 screens when all of them are working. 4 large ones across the top, 6 rows of smaller feeds below. Each feed is labeled with an alphanumeric that corresponds to a camera in the region's network. Roughly 400 cameras total, across about 200 miles of state highway, interstate connector, and rural route. On a normal overnight, about 380 of those feeds are live at any given moment. The rest are down for maintenance, weather, or the kind of random equipment death that just happens with cameras that sit on poles in all weather conditions for 10 or 15 years. 380 live was normal, that's what I want you to understand. Cameras going dark was a regular thing. It was my job to notice when they went dark, log it, determine if it was a physical problem or a network problem, and either dispatch a field tech or flag it for the morning crew. The automated system caught obvious failures. My job was catching the edge cases, the intermittent feeds, the cameras that showed a frozen image instead of going properly offline, the ones where the timestamp kept running, even though the picture hadn't changed in 6 minutes. So when 7 Bravo dropped at 3:58, I logged it and started checking the neighboring cameras to get a sense of whether it was isolated or part of a larger network issue. This is standard. You check 7 Alpha, 7 Charlie, the junction equipment that serves the cluster. If the neighbors are fine, it's probably the camera itself. If they're also showing problems, it's probably the node. 7 Alpha was fine. Clear picture of the Route 19 southbound shoulder, the concrete divider, the yellow mile marker for exit 44. 7 Charlie was fine. Northbound, slight lens distortion from the cold, a pair of red taillights maybe a mile out, barely moving. So it was just 7 Bravo. Camera death. I logged it, pulled the equipment record, noted that 7 Bravo was 7 years old and had been flagged twice in the past year for housing moisture intrusion. Made sense. I forwarded it to the morning crew queue. Then, at 4:01 a.m., 12 Delta went dark. That got my attention slightly more. 12 Delta wasn't near 7 Bravo geographically. It was 12 miles up the interstate, a different highway corridor entirely. 2 cameras going dark 13 minutes apart on different roads wasn't necessarily connected, but it was unusual enough to log the time and notice it. At 4:03, 19 Alpha went dark. At 4:04, 3 Bravo and 3 Charlie dropped simultaneously. That's when my chest did a thing. Not panic, just a heightened awareness of the room around me, the hum of the server rack behind me, the way one of the fluorescent lights had been flickering slightly for the past hour, the sound of my own breathing. I was already straightening in my chair before my brain had fully processed what was happening. 5 cameras down in 6 minutes, spread across 3 separate highway corridors. That's not equipment failure. Equipment failure is random and localized. 5 cameras across 3 corridors in 6 minutes looks like a network event, something hitting the system progressively, working through the nodes. I pulled up the network status dashboard and ran a diagnostic. The dashboard came back clean. All nodes green. All server communications nominal, which didn't make sense, because cameras were clearly going offline. I tried to ping 7 Bravo directly, no response. I tried 12 Delta, no response. 3 Bravo, no response. I sat with that for a minute, because technicians learn not to jump. You see something weird, you document it, you verify it, you look for the obvious explanation before you escalate. The obvious explanation here was a software glitch. Maybe a bad update had pushed through to certain camera models, or there was a configuration error hitting specific firmware versions. That would explain why it was spreading without showing up as a node failure. I started pulling the equipment records for the affected cameras to see if they had anything in common. All manufactured by the same contractor. All running the same firmware version. Firmware last updated 6 weeks ago. Same update that had pushed to about 60% of the network. So, software. Probably. That was the working theory. At 4:07 a.m., 11 more cameras went dark in 40 seconds. I picked up the phone and called the overnight supervisor's cell. Got voicemail. Called again. Voicemail again. I left a message that I tried to keep measured. Network anomaly, Multiple camera failures. Possible firmware issue. Please call back when you get this. I looked at the screens. In the space of 9 minutes, I'd gone from 380 live feeds to 364. And the failures were still coming. Here's the thing I remember most clearly about that moment. I remember the quality of the quiet in the room. The server rack behind me was humming at its usual pitch. The HVAC was doing that low cycling thing. Nothing else. And looking at all those screens, all those roads, Route 19, the interstate, the rural connectors, the overpass approaches, the roads were all empty, which at 4 a.m. was normal. 4 a.m. is the dead hour on the highway. The night trucks have mostly cleared through. The pre-dawn commuters haven't started yet. Empty roads at 4 a.m. are completely normal. But something about the combination, the cameras dropping, the roads empty, the room quiet, sat in my chest wrong. Not a thought, just a physical sensation, like a sound you can't quite hear but your body responds to anyway. I went back to the screen showing 7 Charlie, the one that was still live. The pair of red taillights I'd seen a minute ago. Gone. The road was clear. I switched to 3 Alpha, one of the cameras that hadn't dropped yet, up on the interchange where Route 9 meets the interstate. Clear road. A single overhead light blinking amber on the ramp signal. And then, I almost didn't catch it, because I was looking at the wrong part of the frame. There was something in the left edge of the image, on the shoulder. I leaned closer to the monitor and adjusted the feed to a slightly higher resolution, and what I saw was a car, stopped, on the shoulder. Driver's side door open, the interior dome light making a yellow smear in the camera image. Nobody visible in the car. Nobody visible on the shoulder. At 4:11 a.m., the emergency dispatch radio on my console, which I monitored as part of the job, but which rarely made noise on the overnight, crackled and said something I couldn't make out. I turned up the volume. The voice repeated it. Multiple vehicle incident on Route 9 northbound near the interchange. Possible injuries. Units requested. I looked at the camera covering Route 9 northbound near the interchange. It was still live. It showed me an empty road. Then it went dark. I've told parts of this to the people who came after. Not all of it. The full version of what happened from about 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. that morning, I've only told once. To a woman named Trish, who showed up at the maintenance station in maybe the 3rd month, and who sat across a folding table from me and listened without interrupting, which I wasn't expecting. I'll come back to Trish. She matters. The thing I want to describe that I have trouble describing properly is the progression of that first hour, because I didn't leave the monitoring room immediately. I want to make that clear. I sat in that room and I watched the cameras go dark one by one for almost another 20 minutes before I did anything other than document and attempt to contact my supervisor. Part of that was procedure. You document. You escalate through proper channels before you act. Part of it was something less professional. I think I was waiting for it to make sense. I think I was holding very still and watching the data, and hoping that the data would eventually produce an explanation that fit within the known categories of problems I was trained to deal with. It kept not doing that. By 4:18 a.m., I had 212 cameras live out of 400. The failures were no longer random. I could see a pattern emerging in which cameras were still on and which had gone dark. The remaining live feeds were concentrated in specific geographic pockets, and the dead cameras were spreading outward from the highway nodes I would have expected to fail first if someone had intentionally cut access, sequentially, starting from the main highway control uplink and working outward through branches. That word, intentionally, landed on me around 4:20 a.m., and once it landed, I couldn't move it. The emergency dispatch radio had been busy for the past several minutes. I'd stopped being able to catch individual transmissions because there were too many overlapping, but the words I kept hearing, repeated in different voices across different calls: attacks, accidents, people in the road, not responding to commands, biting. That last one, people biting. I thought, drug incident, bath salts. I'd seen the news things about that, people behaving like animals on synthetic compounds. I thought, okay, so there's an incident somewhere, and it's big enough to generate multiple calls. and the camera system is experiencing an unrelated failure at the same time. Two things happening at once. Coincidences happen. I am smarter than that. I knew I was smarter than that even in the moment. But the smarter part and the comfortable part don't always work on the same timeline. At 4:22 a.m., I put on my jacket, clipped my radio to my belt, picked up my laptop bag, took a flashlight from the charger on the counter, and went outside. The equipment yard at night had its own quality of dark. Not the pure dark of somewhere rural, because there were sodium lights on the perimeter fence that left pools of orange on the gravel. But the lights between the pools were real black, and the shapes of the equipment stored in the yard, the road cones in their stacked ranks, the barrier sections, the heavy green form of the line painting truck, became suggestions rather than facts. I'd been out here hundreds of times on the overnight. It was familiar. The night was cold enough that I could see my breath. April, but a cold one, the kind where the temperature drops hard after midnight. I stood outside the monitoring room door for a moment and listened. Nothing unusual. The highway was audible as a low, continuous murmur about 300 yards to the east. And above that, the usual set of sounds a person stops hearing after a while. Wind in the chain link, some kind of bird in the tree line, the power hum from the transformer on the pole near the entrance. The communications tower was a quarter-mile north of the main facility, connected by a gravel access road. I drove out to it in the work truck, which is what I'd normally do for an equipment inspection. The tower itself was 40 feet of lattice steel, carrying antenna clusters for the camera network, emergency broadcast relay, and the regional weather sensor array. At the base was a locked equipment box the size of a refrigerator, containing the main routing hardware for the highway camera network in the county. I unlocked the box and checked the hardware. Everything looked physically intact. No fault lights on the routing unit, no tripped breakers, no obvious damage. But when I pulled the diagnostic port and ran the laptop check, what I found was that the network configuration had been remotely altered. Not crashed, not failed, altered. Someone had pushed a configuration change through the remote administration system that was progressively disabling camera outputs in a specific sequence. I sat on the gravel next to the equipment box and looked at that line in the diagnostic report for maybe 30 seconds. Remote administration access to the highway camera network, which required credentials that I didn't have, that the overnight supervisor had, that the regional network manager had, and that, according to the access log, had been used by a service account called Maint Oversight 7 at 3:51 a.m., 7 minutes before the first camera went dark. Maint Oversight 7 was not an account I recognized. I tried to call my supervisor again. Voicemail. I called the regional network manager. The phone rang 11 times and went to voicemail. I left a message that was less measured than the first one. The dispatch radio on my belt was generating steady noise now. I turned it up and stood next to the equipment tower in the dark and listened. What I heard over the next 4 minutes was this: multiple calls from Route 9, and the interchange reporting vehicles stopped in lanes, the drivers out of their cars, attacking other drivers. A call from a state trooper unit saying something like, "They are not responding to verbal commands at all. I said they are not responding. These people are not," and then static. A call from someone who wasn't law enforcement at all, who had somehow gotten onto the emergency frequency, who was screaming about her daughter. A call from a dispatcher asking units to respond to 6 separate incidents simultaneously in a region that covered maybe 30 square miles, and the answer from the field was silence. I remember the sky starting to show gray at the edges. Not sunrise yet. Pre-dawn. The kind where the dark lightens slightly, but doesn't become any warmer. And standing there next to the tower, I noticed something about the highway sound. The continuous murmur that I'd described earlier. It was gone. The highway was quiet. Not the quiet of 4 a.m. reduced traffic. Quiet the way a highway goes. Quiet when there's nobody on it, and also nobody moving toward it. I drove back to the monitoring room. I had 147 cameras still live. I'm writing this in the early part of the morning, and outside the maintenance station the day is doing what days do now, which is begin gray and become incrementally less gray, and occasionally offer something that might charitably be called sunlight. The place I'm living in, The maintenance station was a DOT road crew facility, about 6 miles from the original monitoring room, connected to both by a county road that I've since blocked at 2 points with Jersey barriers I moved with the small loader that was already here. I'll describe it because it'll be relevant later. It's a metal building, maybe 80 feet long and 30 feet wide, with a vehicle bay on the south end that used to house the road crew's equipment, patching trucks, sign-making machines, a trailer-mounted generator. The vehicle bay has a sliding metal door that I've reinforced with chain and eye bolts. The north end of the building has a break room, a small office, a parts storage room, and a bathroom with running water, because the facility is on a well and I got the pressure tank working again in the second week. I sleep in the office, which used to belong to the road crew supervisor. His name was printed on a plastic sign next to the door. I left the sign. I don't know why. I didn't know the man, but it felt wrong to take it down. The parts storage room is where I've been keeping food. I'll get to the food situation later, because it has its own story. What I want to describe right now is the camera system I've built, because it's the thing that keeps me sane, and it's the thing that is starting to not keep me sane, which is a problem. When I got to the maintenance station, I'll explain how I got here, and with who. One of the first things I did, before I even properly secured the building, was scavenge a television from the break room, 3 monitors from the parts storage room that the road crew had been using for the sign-making software, and a laptop that had been left on the desk in the office. I connected them to a switch I'd pulled out of the monitoring room before we left. Then, over the following weeks, I started rebuilding cameras. Not building from scratch, pulling them. The highway camera network had thousands of cameras, most of them still physically intact on their poles. Whatever had happened to the network was a software event, not a physical destruction. Some of those cameras could be connected directly with cables, bypassing the network entirely, running on local power. For the ones in range, I ran cable. For the ones farther out, I built repeaters from parts. I ended up with a local camera network covering about a 6-mile radius from the maintenance station, feeding into my jury-rigged monitor array in the break room. 14 cameras. Not 400, but mine, running on my power, my configuration, my cabling, with no remote administration access, because there's nobody left to administrate remotely. Some nights I watch those feeds for hours. I know every inch of every road they cover. I know the specific lean of the sign pole on the Route 9 westbound approach that makes the camera image tilt 2 degrees to the left. I know the stretch of the county road to the south, where the tree canopy is dense enough to make the image dark even in daylight. I know which intersection accumulates debris blown from the fields and which one stays clean, because of how the wind runs. And I know that at 4 a.m., something happens on the cameras. I've seen it 11 times now. I've logged every instance. I'll get there. First, the beginning. When I came back into the monitoring room that morning, I didn't need the camera feeds to know something was badly wrong outside. The dispatch radio was enough. But the feeds helped me understand the geography of it. The 147 cameras still live, gave me a map, of sorts, of where the incidents were happening and where they weren't. The pattern was clear when I laid it out on the regional map I had tacked to the wall. The incidents were concentrated on the highway corridors. Route 9, the interstate stretch between exits 31 and 47, the connector near Millbrook, the interchange. The cameras that were still live were mostly on rural connectors and secondary roads. The camera failures had followed the main highway routes, and the incidents on the radio were following the same routes, which meant 2 things. 1, the infected, or whatever they were concentrated where there were stranded cars, because that's where there had been people, drivers who'd stopped, who'd gotten out of their cars to see what was happening, who'd encountered whatever was happening. 2, the rural and secondary roads were quieter, at least for the moment. I was not trained for this. I want to make that absolutely clear. 12 years of camera maintenance and network diagnostics does not equip a person for an outbreak response. I barely had a first aid certification, and that had expired. I was a technician. I noticed things, and I fixed things, and I was very comfortable being alone with equipment in the dark. But I had something that turned out to matter in those early hours. I had the map, Not just the paper map on the wall. I had 12 years of knowing that road network in my bones. I knew which on-ramps had the longest sight lines. I knew where the low points were on Route 9, where water pooled after rain and made the shoulder slick. I knew the exact location of every maintenance access gate on the highway perimeter fence. There were 23 of them in the county, and I had keys to all of them on the truck. I knew the maintenance routes, the service roads, the drainage tunnels under the highway embankment at mile marker 34 and mile marker 61. Things that don't exist on consumer maps. Things that most people don't know about because there's no reason to know. I was sitting with that knowledge, trying to figure out if it had any use, when the first car pulled into the facility lot. It was a blue minivan, moving fast enough that it bottomed out on the entrance dip, and it stopped crooked in the gravel, and the person who got out of it was a woman in her early 40s, in the clothes you'd have on if you'd been driving at night. Jeans, a zip-up sweatshirt, sneakers. She had a cut on her forearm that had bled through the sweatshirt sleeve, and she was looking around the facility with the frantic expression of someone who has outrun something and is now trying to figure out if they've outrun it far enough. I went outside. "Are you from Dot?" she said. "Yeah." Does this place lock, the gate?" I looked at the entrance gate. Standard chain link, keyed padlock, not anything that would stop a determined person, but it swung inward and latched. "I can chain it," I said. "Please chain it," she said. "Please right now." I chained the gate. Her name was Donna Faber. She'd been driving home from visiting her mother in the next county, taking the highway, when traffic had stopped on the interstate near exit 38, and she'd sat in it for 3 minutes before she saw what was at the front of the stoppage and turned around on the shoulder and drove the wrong way on the exit ramp to get off, and drove until she saw the DOT facility lights. Her arm. A man had grabbed her through her car window when she'd stopped to try to see what was happening at the front of the backup. She'd managed to pull away. She didn't know if he'd broken the skin. I looked at the cut. It wasn't deep, but it was there. Broken skin. "Do you know if he was—" I started. "I don't know," she said. "He was acting wrong. The way he was moving, it was wrong. I don't know. What is happening?" "I don't know exactly," I said, which was true. "But I have a monitoring room inside with emergency dispatch radio and cameras. Come in, and let's figure out what we know." That's how it started. Donna Faber was the first. By 5:30 a.m., I had 7 people in the monitoring room. I should describe the monitoring room again, as it was in those hours, because it became a different place when it had people in it. All those years of it being mine alone, mine and the screens and the server hum, and then suddenly it's full of strangers and their sounds and their smells, and the specific weight of their fear, which is different from the fear of being alone. Being alone and afraid is a certain thing I know how to handle, or at least to sit with. Being with other frightened people is different. Their fear feeds on itself. They look at each other and see confirmation. The 7 people who arrived in that window: Donna from the minivan, a retired couple named Floyd and Peggy, who'd been driving back from an overnight trip and whose car had stopped working somewhere on Route 9 and who'd walked nearly a mile to find the facility. A younger man named Kyle who worked for a pest control company and had been in his work van when an infected person had come through his passenger window. He'd somehow gotten out and run, and he was missing one shoe and his hands were shaking so badly he kept dropping things. A woman named Nolan, that was her last name. Her first was Candace, but she told me on the second day to call her Nolan, and I did. Who'd been on her way to an early shift at a distribution warehouse and had driven straight here when she'd heard the emergency broadcast override on the radio. And 2 more. A young man named Brent, maybe 25, who said almost nothing for the first several hours, and sat against the wall near the door and watched everything. And a state DOT contractor I recognized by name but had never met in person, a man named Harlan Doss. Harlan was the one who bothered me. He arrived at 5:19 a.m. in a white pickup with DOT contractor markings, and he came through the gate before I'd finished unlocking it, and he moved through the monitoring room, doing a quick assessment of the equipment that felt practiced. He clocked the screens, the server rack, the network hardware. He looked at the regional map on the wall. He was maybe 55, heavy-set, gray hair cut close, and he had the specific kind of calm that some people have in emergencies. That's not the calm of composure. It's the calm of already knowing what's coming. "What are you still running on?" he said, not introducing himself, just talking to me, like I worked for him. "Local network," I said. "Camera feeds through the DOT backbone, but it's degrading. I've got 147 cameras and dropping." "You isolated the configuration change?" I stopped. "How do you know about the configuration change?" He looked at me with an expression I've spent months trying to name. Not guilty, not defensive. Something more like resigned. Like a person whose plan didn't go quite the way they planned. "I need to see the access logs," he said. "Tell me what Maint Oversight 7 is." He looked at me for a long time. Floyd, the retired man, had been watching us from across the room. Donna was on the phone trying to reach her kids. Kyle was sitting on the floor. "Sit down," Harlan said. Not to me, to the room. People sat, partly because he said it with authority, and partly because they were exhausted and frightened, and sitting down felt like an anchor. Then he told us what he knew. "Here's what I can tell you about what Harlan Doss said, and here's where I have to be careful, because what he said, and what turned out to be true, have some overlap and some divergence." The overlap. There had been reports coming into certain federal contractor networks for several weeks prior, through the kind of agencies that don't get named in public documents, about a pathogen event in development somewhere to the west. Not a bioweapon specifically, or not primarily, but something that had escaped containment from a research context and was moving faster through transmission than anyone had modeled. The response plan, such as it was, had included elements that involved the highway surveillance network. Specifically, the idea that controlling information flow through camera feeds would prevent panic-driven traffic surges that would overwhelm response corridors. In other words, they'd planned to shut down the cameras. They just hadn't planned to shut them down quite like this. "Who is they?" I said. Harlan said a name I didn't recognize and two acronyms that I still won't write down in here. Not because I'm protecting anyone. Anyone who those people were trying to protect is beyond helping at this point. But because I'm not certain I'm remembering them correctly, and I don't want to be wrong in writing. "So you knew," Donna said. She'd put the phone down. She hadn't gotten through to her kids. "You knew something was coming, and instead of warning people, you shut down the cameras." "It wasn't that simple," Harlan said. "My children are on Route 9, Donna said. Harlan didn't answer that. To his credit, he didn't try. Some things don't have an answer you can give to a person, and he seemed to know it. The divergence between what Harlan said and what turned out to be true. Harlan believed, at the time, that the response plan was operational, that there were assets in position, that coordination was happening, that this was a managed event being managed. What I now know, months later, is that whatever was coordinated collapsed within about 6 hours of the outbreak reaching the highway corridors. The response that Harlan believed was in motion either never happened, or happened somewhere very far away, and had nothing to do with Callerton County, or Route 9, or any road I've ever maintained. He wasn't lying, he was wrong. There's a difference, though in the moment it didn't feel like one. What mattered in that room on that morning was this. Harlan had knowledge of the highway maintenance infrastructure that overlapped with mine, but from a contractor's perspective, access tunnels, drainage systems, service roads. He knew about the emergency management storage depots that the county maintained at 3 highway maintenance facilities, including the one where we were sitting. "There's a storage room in this facility," he said. "Eastern wall, back of the vehicle bay. It's a county emergency management cache. Food, water, medical, communication." I knew the vehicle bay. I had the keys to the vehicle bay. I'd been in it dozens of times. I'd never thought to question why the eastern wall had a door I didn't have a key to. We went and opened it. 300 gallons of water in sealed containers. Enough MREs and shelf-stable food for approximately 40 people for 30 days, according to the inventory sheet taped to the inside of the door. A first aid cache. 2 hand-crank emergency radios. A set of laminated emergency management protocols that were useless in their specifics but useful as evidence that someone, somewhere, had thought about this. Flashlights, batteries, 2 rolls of heavy plastic sheeting, a hand-operated water filter, no weapons. I mention this because it becomes relevant. It took us about an hour to move that cache into the monitoring room, which I'd decided was the most defensible space. 1 door, the windows were small and high on the walls. The server rack could be moved to reinforce the door if needed. By the time we finished moving things, it was close to 7 in the morning, and the light outside had gone from gray to the flat white of an overcast day. We had the emergency radio going, both of them, tuned to different channels, and what we were hearing was fragmentary and grim. The interstate was impassable from exit 31 through at least exit 52. Route 9 was described in one transmission as completely compromised, do not use. The county emergency services were, as far as I could tell from radio traffic, at about 40% operational, some units still responding, some offline, no clear centralized coordination. There was a National Guard activation being mentioned, but nobody seemed to know what it meant in practical terms for our area. At 7:23 a.m., 2 more cars arrived in the lot, 3 more people. Now we were 10. I want to tell you about each of these people properly, not because the story requires it, but because they deserve to be named. Floyd and Peggy Hatcher, retired, from Millbrook, who'd been married 41 years, and who sat together and touched each other constantly, hands and arms. The specific physical communication of people who've been close for a long time. Kyle Bremer, pest control, who cleaned the cut on his forearm with antiseptic from the first aid cache and eventually stopped shaking. Candace Nolan, distribution warehouse, who turned out to have the most practical instincts of anyone in that room, who started inventorying the food supply before anyone asked her to, who figured out that the facility bathroom could serve more than 10 people if we managed timing, who organized the MRE selection by caloric content. Brent Calloway, who I still, months later, don't fully understand. I'll come to Brent. Harlan Doss. The 3 new arrivals. A man named Tim Spicer, who drove a septic service truck and had been on his way to a job when he'd driven into a situation on Route 9 and backed out and followed the DOT signage to the facility, which was the only logical destination he could think of. A teenage girl, 17, whose name was Haley, who'd been walking from a friend's house when she'd seen things on the highway on-ramp she wouldn't describe, and had hidden behind the facility's equipment shed for nearly an hour before she'd knocked on the chain link. And a man named Doug Pratt, who was, it turned out, a volunteer EMT, and who immediately took charge of the wound inventory, going around the room asking everyone to show him any possible contact points. Donna's forearm, a scratch on Floyd's hand that he'd gotten on the chain link. Kyle's forearm. Doug was very careful and very quiet about it. He didn't say anything alarming. He documented what he saw, and he pulled me aside, later, and told me what I'd already been thinking. "We don't know what the transmission vector is," he said, "or if it is broken skin contact. We don't know any of that." "No," I said. "I'm not saying we isolate those 3. I'm saying we watch." "Watch for what, specifically?" He thought about it. "Behavioral change. Physiological change. Anything that looks like fever or altered state." He paused. "And we need to talk about the gate. The gate. The chain link gate. People were still finding us." By noon, we had 19 people in the monitoring room and the vehicle bay. I'm going to skip some of the first aid detail, because it's both too much and too repetitive to tell properly. The same conversations happening with each new arrival. The same set of fears, the same questions we couldn't answer. What I want to get to is the afternoon of day 1, because that's where things changed from waiting for help to help isn't coming in the time frame you're waiting for. The shift happened at around 2 p.m. I was at the monitor console. I'd been there most of the day with brief breaks, and I was down to 61 live cameras. The loss had slowed from the rapid early drop, but it was still going. I'd been watching the remaining feeds for information about what was outside, what the road situation looked like, whether there was any organized response visible. What I'd seen, abandoned cars on every highway visible to any remaining camera, some with doors open and some closed. At 3 separate camera locations, groups of figures moving along the road surface, not running, walking, but with the particular quality of something walking without being conscious of where it's walking. No apparent direction, no apparent destination, clustering around stopped cars and then drifting away. I watched one group of maybe 12 of them on the Route 9 southbound feed for nearly 20 minutes, and they moved the way water moves, following low points, filling spaces, with no goal that I could identify. One of the cameras still live was on the Route 9 overpass above the county road leading to our facility. And at 2:17 p.m., that camera showed me something I didn't tell most of the people in the room about until later. A cluster of those figures coming off the overpass on-ramp, moving south, in the direction of the facility. I told Harlan and Doug. The 3 of us stepped into the vehicle bay. "How long do we have?" Doug asked. "The overpass is about 3 miles out on foot. If they're moving at a consistent pace, maybe an hour and a half. Could be more, could be less, depending on what they get distracted by along the way." What distracts them? I thought about what I'd observed on the feeds. Sounds, I said. Or at least that's what it looks like. They change direction toward sounds. This was a guess, based on limited observation, but it turned out to be right. Harlan said, "What do you know about the maintenance routes?" And there it was, the thing that had been sitting in the back of my head since early morning, waiting for the moment I needed to say it out loud. "The highway maintenance system has a tunnel," I said. 2 of them, actually, in the county. Drainage culverts wide enough to walk through. One at mile marker 34, one at mile marker 61. The one at 34 runs under the highway embankment and connects to the secondary service road on the other side. The service road runs north for about 4 miles and connects to the Route 11 corridor, which, as of this morning at around 5 a.m., was still relatively clear based on the camera feeds that were live then. Harlan was nodding. "I know about those culverts. Maintenance access through them. They're in the DOT maintenance records, not on any public map. Access points on both sides of the highway, keyed with the same lock system as the maintenance gates." I held up my key ring. 4 miles underground? Doug said. "Not underground, under the embankment. The tunnel section is maybe 60, 70 feet. After that, you're on the service road in the open, but it's a maintenance-only road fenced on both sides." Doug considered this. "When do we move?" "Not yet," I said. "Not with 19 people in an hour and a half. We can't move that many people that fast and quietly. We need to know more about what's east before we commit to going that way. So we wait. We gather information first." That was day 1. Day 2 was a different kind of hard. We hadn't slept. Not properly. 3 or 4 people at a time had managed brief stretches on the floor of the vehicle bay, which had moving pads and a stack of emergency blankets from the cache. I'd napped for maybe 90 minutes around 3 a.m., sitting upright in the monitor chair. The feeds had held at 53 live cameras through the night, which was better than I'd expected. What I'd watched through the night, the group of figures I'd tracked on the overpass camera, had not reached the facility. They'd turned east at an intersection about a mile out. Something had directed them east. Maybe a sound I couldn't identify, and I'd tracked them on 2 other cameras until they'd left the frame. The facility lot was clear. The county road approach was clear. But I'd seen other movement in other parts of the network, and the sum of it was not reassuring. The behavioral pattern was becoming clearer to me. They didn't patrol. They didn't plan routes. They seemed to respond primarily to sound, and when there was no sound in their immediate range, they drifted in a vague directionality that I couldn't identify as intentional. They didn't appear to sleep, or if they did, I couldn't distinguish sleeping from drifting on the camera footage. They didn't eat in any way I could observe on the feeds. They moved at a walking pace, and they did not run. When they encountered an obstacle, a stopped car, a Jersey barrier, they pushed at it until they went around it, not over it. They could not climb. I determined this on day 2 by watching a feed that covered the Route 9 on-ramp retaining wall. A group of 7 had encountered the wall, which was maybe 4 feet high and smooth-sided, the concrete type used on highway construction. They'd pushed against it. They'd followed it to either end. They had not climbed over it. One of them had fallen against it and made no attempt to use its hands to break the fall. I logged this. It seemed important. The thing about watching those feeds for hours was that it was putting information into my head that I needed. And it was also doing something else. It was making the outside world feel simultaneously very real and very distant. I'd watch a figure moving on a stretch of road I'd driven probably 400 times, and it didn't look like something that was happening in a world I was part of. It looked like a problem on a screen. I recognized this as a danger, the same dissociative quality that lets you do something risky because it's playing out on a monitor, not in your face. I kept having to remind myself, that's Route 9. That's 20 minutes from here. Those figures are real, and they weigh real physical weight, and they can cause real physical harm. On day 2, Kyle Bremer developed a fever. Donna's arm showed no signs of infection. Floyd's hand was fine. Kyle, though, by midday his temperature, measured with the thermometer from the first aid cache, was 101.4. By evening it was 103.1. He was sweating through his shirt, and he was confused about small things. He'd ask a question, and then ask the same question again a few minutes later. He'd hold a conversation, and then look at you like he wasn't sure who you were. Doug Pratt managed this with a steadiness I still respect enormously. He explained what he was seeing to Brent and me without embellishing it, told us what he thought we needed to watch for, and told us that he didn't know what this meant in terms of transmission, and that nobody should make any assumptions in either direction. He asked that Kyle be moved to the corner of the vehicle bay, separated from the main group, not isolated but given space. Kyle went along with it. He was still him, still talking, still responding to his name, still making weak jokes about the pest control van he'd abandoned on the highway with 2 cases of chemicals in the back. He was frightened, and I could see it, and I sat with him for a while on day 2 afternoon in the vehicle bay, with the big sliding door cracked an inch for light, listening to the sounds from outside. You learn, very quickly, to read sounds. Before all this, sound was background. The highway murmur, the HVAC, the bird in the tree line. Now sound was information. Every sound outside the fence had a potential meaning, and the absence of sound had meaning too. Because a real absence of sound, total quiet, no wind movement, no distant birds, usually preceded something approaching. Kyle asked me, in the afternoon, if I thought his wife had gotten out of the city. She was a nurse, worked a hospital in the main city, 40 miles west. I don't know, I said. She's pretty smart, he said. She knows how to handle things. That's good. She probably figured something out. He looked at the ceiling of the vehicle bay. The hospital would be bad though, right? Hospitals would be bad. Too many sick people already. She's smart, like you said. Yeah. He was quiet for a while. I don't feel that bad. You know? Like I feel sick, but I still feel like me. Is that how it works? Do people stop feeling like themselves before it happens, or does it just... I don't know, Kyle. Okay. He seemed to accept that. Okay. Kyle died on day 3, early morning, before anyone else was fully awake. I know this because I was at the monitor station, and I heard a change in his breathing from across the vehicle bay. I'd been listening to it, monitoring it without meaning to, the way you monitor a sound once you know it matters. And then the breathing stopped, and it was quiet. He didn't change. He didn't come back. He just died. I sat with that for a long time, and I don't have much to say about it that amounts to anything useful, except that Kyle Bremer was a decent person who drove a pest control van and dropped things because his hands were shaking and told weak jokes about his chemical stockpile, and he deserved better than to die in a vehicle bay on a moving pad while everyone slept around him and the cameras showed empty roads. We buried him in the equipment yard, in the far corner, under a section of chain link we folded back. Tim Spicer made a cross from 2 pieces of road stake. We said whatever we knew about Kyle, which was not much. His wife's name was Deanna. He'd had the van for 3 years. He was afraid of the dark as a child, and he'd grown out of it and then grown back into it on day 2, asking us to leave a light on near him. Donna stood at the grave for a long time after the rest of us had gone back inside. On day 3 afternoon, I told the group we were leaving on day 4. I'd been watching the feeds all morning, and I had a clearer picture now of the geography. The eastern corridor, Route 11, and the county roads beyond it, was showing significantly less activity than the highway network. In the 12 cameras I had left that covered that direction, I'd seen maybe 6 of the infected across a 3-hour observation window, compared to the dense activity I was still seeing on Route 9 and the interstate. The service road on the far side of the mile marker 34 tunnel remained clear. There was a highway maintenance station on Route 11, about 5 miles from the tunnel exit. I knew it. I'd been to it a dozen times over the years. It was a facility like this one, but larger. Bigger vehicle bay, fuel storage, a depot room. And now, knowing about the emergency cache in this facility, I was wondering if that one had the same. Harlan confirmed it did. "What about getting there?" Nolan asked. She had a direct way of framing questions that I'd come to appreciate. She didn't dress things up. "On foot through the tunnel and down the service road, about 6 miles. Carrying supplies. We can't take everything. We take water and food for 2 days. Tools, the medical kit, the radios." I looked around the room. 18 people. "It's going to be a slow move. We need to be quiet. Sounds attract them." "You keep saying sounds attract them," Brent said. He'd been watching me for 3 days with an expression I couldn't read. "You're basing that on camera observation?" "Yes." "So you're basing our survival plan on second-hand observation through a deteriorating camera network." I looked at him. "I'm basing it on the best available information. If you have additional information, I want it." He didn't say anything else. There was more back and forth. Peggy Hatcher was worried about Floyd's knee. He'd been favoring it since day 1, and she was afraid a 6-mile walk would do serious damage. Doug said he'd manage it. Tim Spicer wanted to know why we couldn't use vehicles. I explained that noise was the issue, and that the access road to the tunnel was narrow and unpaved, and probably not passable in anything larger than a truck anyway. Harlan said nothing. He sat in the corner and looked at the map. After the group dispersed to sleep or try to, Harlan found me at the monitors. "There's something I didn't tell the whole group," he said. "Okay." "The tunnel at mile marker 34. There's a secondary access point that isn't in the standard maintenance records. About halfway through, there's a lateral access shaft. Goes down about 20 feet to a substructure that was built as part of an emergency management civil defense project in the 80s, never officially decommissioned." I looked at him. "How do you know about that?" "Contractor work, 4 years ago. Structural assessment. The shaft is sealed, but the seal is a standard maintenance padlock, same keyway as the road maintenance system." I held up my keys. "It's a storage space," he said. "About 800 square feet. The inventory from my assessment 4 years ago included food, water, communication equipment, and a generator. I don't know what condition any of it is in. Why didn't you tell me this immediately?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I didn't know if we were going to need it. I was hoping we'd get radio contact with the coordination network by now." "And?" He looked at the emergency radio on the counter. "Nothing on any frequency I know." I sat with that. The coordination network Harlan had described, the one he'd believed was operational, had been silent for 3 days. The protocols he'd expected to see activated hadn't activated. Whatever plan had existed for this, whatever the intention had been behind the camera shutdown and the service accounts and the emergency caches, it had either collapsed or bypassed us entirely. "Harlan," I said, "straight answer. Do you think there's coordination happening somewhere? Somewhere that's going to send someone out here?" He thought about it. He had the quality of a man who doesn't want to lie and also doesn't want to tell you the truth. "I think," he said carefully, "that what's happening here is probably happening in a lot of places. And I don't know if the capacity exists to respond to all of those places at once." That was all I needed. "We leave tomorrow afternoon," I said. 2 hours before dark. Enough light to get through the tunnel and down the service road. Dark enough that we're harder to see. "And the substructure?" "We'll assess it when we get there." Day 4. The day we left. I'm going to tell this part the way it actually happened, without shortcutting the details. Because those details are the reason some people who walked out of that monitoring room are alive right now. We spent the morning of day 4 doing 2 things. The first was preparation, packing what we could carry, identifying who was carrying what, working out the order of march through the tunnel. Nolan managed the supply organization. Doug managed the medical situation and made sure everyone's footwear was adequate. I worked the monitors until the last possible moment, watching the approaches, watching the service road, making a final assessment of route conditions. The second thing I did on the morning of day 4 was write down, on paper, using a road crew notepad I found in the office desk, everything I knew about the camera system, the tunnel, the access points, the service road, and the Route 11 facility, names and location of all 23 maintenance access gates, coordinates, from memory, of the drainage culverts, the inventory of the emergency cache in the facility we were leaving. I sealed this in a plastic bag and left it taped to the inside of the monitoring room door. I don't know why exactly. For whoever came next, maybe. If anyone came next, at 4:15 p.m., 18 people walked out of the monitoring room and across the equipment yard and through the maintenance gate on the south side of the facility. I locked the gate behind us. The walk to mile marker 34 was 11 minutes on a normal day. We did it in about 35 minutes, moving in 2 loose columns, staying to the grassy shoulder away from the road surface, because the road surface was loud underfoot. The late afternoon was quiet, a real quiet, the kind that had become either reassuring or deeply troubling, depending on which direction your mind went. Harlan and I walked at the front. Behind us, Nolan and Tim and Brent. Then the Hatchers, Floyd moving slow, Peggy's hand on his arm. Then the rest, Doug at the back. At one point, about 6 minutes into the walk, we heard sounds to the west, not close, maybe a quarter mile, coming from the direction of the highway interchange. A low collective sound, not loud enough to be distinct, just present. The kind of sound a large group of anything makes when it's moving through an area. We stopped. Nobody spoke. We waited for maybe 90 seconds. The sound didn't get closer. We kept walking. The maintenance access gate at mile marker 34 was a green-painted steel door set into the concrete embankment, about 6 feet wide and 4 feet high, low enough that you needed to crouch going in. I'd been through it maybe 15 times over the years, inspecting the drainage system, and it always had the smell of groundwater and concrete. It still did. I unlocked it and pulled it open, and it made a sound that I didn't like. Not loud, but audible. The rasp of hinges that hadn't moved in a while. We stopped and listened. Nothing came. "Flashlights on," I said. "No talking once we're inside." We went in one by one. I went last, pulling the door shut behind me. The tunnel was 63 feet of concrete box culvert, maybe 6 feet wide, and 5 feet tall in the clear. Tall enough for most people to stand near upright. The floor was dry, slightly gritty. In the flashlight beams, the walls showed water stain lines and some old graffiti from whatever occasion a bored road crew worker had come through here. We were about 20 feet in when Harlan, at the front, stopped and pointed his light at the right-hand wall. There was a door. Not a subtle thing. A proper steel door, painted over but unmistakably a door, with a hasp and a padlock. The kind of padlock that was in the same family as the maintenance key ring in my pocket. I tried the second largest key on the ring. It opened. What was behind that door wasn't what I expected, and I don't say that lightly, because I'd already revised my expectations of what things could be twice in the past 4 days. The shaft went down, as Harlan had said, about 20 feet, a steel ladder bolted to concrete, the kind of ladder you might find in a utility access shaft. The air coming up from below was cooler than the tunnel and had a damp, still quality. No smell of rot or water, just age. At the bottom was the space Harlan had described. 800 square feet, roughly, lit by a single emergency light that flickered on when I found the switch on the wall near the bottom of the ladder. A battery-backed fixture that had apparently been maintained at some point, because it worked. The room was divided into a storage area and what had clearly been intended as a small operations space, a built-in desk, 2 chairs, a wall rack for equipment. The storage was intact. Not everything was in usable condition. Some of the food had degraded beyond anything safe. Some of the water containers had cracked, but a significant portion of it was fine. Military spec sealed MRE cases, a palletized water supply in intact 5-gallon containers, a generator with 2 5-gallon fuel cans, basic tools, 2 CB radios in original packaging, and, this is the thing that has mattered most, in the month since, 3 cardboard boxes of highway camera components, spare housings, a PTZ control unit, network switches, and about 200 feet of coaxial cable in a loose spool. I stood in that room with my flashlight, and I looked at those camera components, and I felt something that I didn't expect to feel, which was a very precise kind of hope. Not the big emotional kind, the small practical kind, that comes from recognizing that you have the pieces to build a specific thing that you know how to build. We stayed in that substructure for one night. It was the safest we'd felt since before 4 a.m. on day 1. The next morning, we climbed back up, walked the remaining tunnel, emerged into gray morning light on the east side of the highway embankment, and started down the service road. Route 11 maintenance station. That's where I'm sitting now, months later, writing this with a road crew notepad and a mechanical pencil I found in the depot office. I want to tell you how we got here from the service road, but before I do, I need to tell you about Brent. Brent Calloway had been one of the quieter people in the group from the beginning, and I'd interpreted that as fear, or shock, or some combination. The kind of withdrawal that comes when a person is processing something their normal life gave them no framework for. He was in his mid-20s. He drove. He moved his share of supplies. He didn't complain. He stayed back from the main group conversations, but wasn't isolated from them. He was just quiet. On the service road, about 2 miles from the tunnel exit, he walked up beside me. "I need to tell you something," he said. Quiet, not urgent. The way someone says something they've been rehearsing. "Okay, I know what Maint Oversight 7 is." I slowed my pace. The rest of the group was strung out behind us, giving us a natural buffer. Harlan was 4 or 5 people back. "Go ahead," I said. "It's a service account maintained by a contractor called Bellwether Systems. They do network management for several state DOT departments. I work for Bellwether." Worked. He said the past tense like it surprised him. "I was doing a contract audit of the highway camera network for the state. Part of my job was testing the administrative access controls." Testing how? Penetration testing. Verifying that the access was secure, that nobody outside the authorized list could execute configuration changes. I let that sit for a moment. And 3 weeks before all this, I submitted a report saying that Maint Oversight 7 had been assigned elevated permissions that weren't justified by the account's stated function. Permissions that would allow a full sequential camera shutdown if someone executed the right command sequence. What happened to the report? He was quiet for a few steps. It was acknowledged. I was told the elevated permissions were part of an emergency management protocol, and that I shouldn't document them in the standard audit report. I looked at him. Shouldn't document them. I was told to remove the finding from the final report. Did you? He didn't answer immediately. I flagged it to my direct manager and told him I wasn't comfortable removing a security finding from an audit document. He told me to do it anyway. He stopped. I did it. I removed the finding. 3 weeks later, he made a gesture that covered everything. We walked in silence for a moment. "I don't know if it would have changed anything," he said. "If the finding had stayed in the report, if someone had acted on it, I don't know if it would have changed what happened." "Probably not," I said, "but it might have meant less time wasted in the monitoring room, trying to figure out if it was a software failure." "Yeah." "How much less time? Hard to say what that would have cost." I was thinking of Kyle, which isn't fair to put on Brent Calloway. I know that, but I thought it anyway. "I'm telling you because you need to know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything." We walked the remaining miles to the Route 11 station without talking much. The maintenance station was unlocked when we arrived. The vehicle bay door was rolled up. The interior lights were on. on a generator, running, the tank half full. And there was food on the break room table. Canned food, a propane burner, a pot, not recently prepared, a day old, maybe 2. But there, someone had been here. We searched the building, carefully and quietly. Nobody was there. But in the office on the desk, the one I now sleep in, the one with the road crew supervisor's name on the plastic sign by the door, there was a notepad, and on it was written, in handwriting that looked like it was trying to be calm and not quite succeeding, Route 11 East is clear to county line, as of 2 days ago. Food and depot. Generator has about 4 days of fuel. I went north. If you find this, the cameras can still be salvaged if you have the right hardware. Stay on the high ground. No name, no date. I've thought about who wrote that note hundreds of times. I've looked at the handwriting until I know it the way you know a face. The way the letters lean slightly left. The way the capital R was started, and then restarted. The double underline on the word cameras. I've tried to reason out who it was, based on what they knew and what they'd done. They knew about the generator. They knew about the cameras. They said the right hardware, as if they knew it would be meaningful to whoever found the note. I've never found out who it was. I want to. That's one of the things I keep alive in the back of my head as a reason to keep the camera network running, to keep watching the roads. Whoever wrote that note might be the reason we survived the first weeks. And they went north. And maybe they're still out there. And maybe, one of these nights, a camera on the North Road will show me something that resolves that particular uncertainty. It hasn't yet. Let me tell you about the months. Not in day-by-day detail. I couldn't do that even if I wanted to, because some of those weeks blurred in ways that make them hard to separate in memory. But the shape of the time. The first 2 months were about establishing that the station could be a long-term home. This was not immediately obvious. The building was sound, the generator worked, the well pressure system could be revived, but the facility had no provisions beyond what had been in the vehicle bay and the depot room, and those weren't inexhaustible. We were 18 people, actually 15 by the time we arrived. Donna Faber had made a decision at the tunnel exit and walked east on the service road to try to reach the county road that would take her toward where her kids had been. We'd tried to talk her out of it. She'd made her choice with the specific firmness of a parent who has calculated all the risks and decided that the risks of not going are worse than the risks of going. I gave her my backup flashlight and the best route I could describe. She nodded and walked away. I've never seen her again. Then there was Floyd Hatcher. Floyd's knee was worse than Peggy had let on. The walk had done real damage, and when Doug examined it properly at the station, he told me quietly that it was a severe sprain at minimum, possibly a torn ligament. Floyd needed rest, limited movement, and monitoring. What Floyd got was rest and limited movement, because monitoring was the only of those 3 we could actually provide. He spent the first weeks in the break room with his leg elevated, drinking water and eating MREs, and talking to Peggy in that low, constant murmur they had, and getting steadily worse. And then, at around the 5-week mark, when I'd been running myself ragged on camera work and food runs, and hadn't been in to see Floyd for 3 days, steadily better. He's not the same Floyd who walked the service road. He uses a length of road stake as a walking stick now, and he favors the knee even on good days, and he can't do anything that requires covering distance quickly. But he's here. He's alive. He and Peggy are the oldest survivors at the station, and they filled a particular role that I don't know how to name. Not leadership, more like gravity. A reason for the shape of things. The food situation. Here's how it worked. The depot room in the maintenance station had enough for maybe 3 weeks of full rations for 15 people. Harlan knew of another emergency cache about 2 miles east on Route 11, in a roadside rest area that had a county emergency management storage unit, smaller than the one at the monitoring facility, but still significant. In the first week, before we'd properly established the station's perimeter, Harlan and Nolan and Tim made a run to the rest area. They came back with 2 cartloads of supplies, moving quietly and quickly on foot. That extended us. But we needed a sustainable food source, not just cash depletion. There was a farm supply store about 3 miles south on the county road. I knew it. I'd bought equipment from it a few times over the years. Tim Spicer, who had some mechanical aptitude from his septic truck work, got one of the road crew pickup trucks running off the generator-charged battery, and on day 9, Tim and Brent and I drove to the farm supply in that truck, very slowly, very quietly, with the engine at the lowest throttle that would keep us moving. The farm supply had been partially looted, front windows broken, shelves inside turned over, some of the cash register area ransacked. But the back of the store, the agricultural supply section, where you'd buy seeds and fertilizers and irrigation equipment, was untouched. Nobody had gone there, because nobody looting a farm supply store was thinking about seeds. We filled the truck bed with seed stock, a hand pump irrigation system, and every gardening tool we could find. The parking lot had a concrete planter area about 40 feet by 60 feet, filled with good soil, that the store had used for displaying plants. We claimed it. By the time the cached food ran out, around the 6-week mark, we had a functioning kitchen garden, producing herbs and greens and, eventually, a decent potato crop from a commercial seed potato lot that had been in the farm supply cold room. It wasn't enough on its own, but combined with what we could salvage from the rest area cache, from smaller runs to abandoned rural properties, from hunting with the compound bow that Tim discovered in the vehicle bay, and employees, left behind with a 6-pack of broadheads, and from the unexpected bounty of a large deer population that had no remaining human predation pressure, we were eating. Not well, not always enough, but eating. Trish arrived at the beginning of the 3rd month. She came in from the east, alone, on foot, carrying a backpack and a road atlas. She knocked on the vehicle bay door in the middle of the day, and Tim opened the slider an inch and looked out, and she said through the gap, in a very matter-of-fact voice, "I saw your cameras on the poles by the interchange. They looked functional. Is there a technician?" That's how she introduced herself. Not her name, not her situation. She asked if there was a technician. I came to the door. "You're running those feeds locally?" she asked. "Yeah." She studied me for a moment. "Smart. What frequency are you on?" "I've been trying to hit all the VHF frequencies in sequence." "We're not broadcasting," I said. "But you have receivers?" "Yeah." "Then we need to talk." Trish's situation. She was an electrical engineer, had been working for a regional utility company when the outbreak hit, and had been moving east since the 1st week, following what she described as a theory about infrastructure islands, places where the combination of existing physical infrastructure and population sparsity created survivable conditions. She'd been moving alone by choice, which she explained with a brevity that closed further discussion. Moving in a group requires consensus. I don't do well with consensus. She'd been listening to VHF radio frequencies as she moved, building a picture of who else was out there and where. What she'd found, over 2.5 months of listening, was fragmentary and grim, but not total silence. There were radio operators active in several areas, a compound of some kind about 60 miles northeast, a small community on a lake to the south, an individual broadcasting daily from somewhere she estimated was 40 to 50 miles west. 40 to 50 miles west, I said, back toward the highway network. "I know," she said. That's essentially in the middle of what I was observing as the main outbreak concentration." "I know," she said again. "That's why I stopped and knocked on a door with cameras." She stayed. There was no formal decision about it. She looked at the camera network I'd built and she had opinions about it, which she shared without being asked. And the opinions were right. And I found myself grateful for them in a way I hadn't expected to feel about anything from another person. The opinion she shared first. The cameras I was running were visible from the road. Their housings, the cable runs, the pole mounts I'd improvised from road signage hardware, visible in daylight to anyone looking for them. "If you're running a camera network and you don't want people to know about it," she said, "you need better housing concealment. Or you accept that you're advertising your position to anyone smart enough to recognize what they're seeing." "The person who went north," I said, "from the note in the office." She looked at me. "They said the cameras can be salvaged if you have the right hardware." They knew what they were looking at. "Yeah," Trish said. So might someone else. I need to tell you about the 4 a.m. thing. I've been building up to it. It's the reason I started writing this down. The reason that felt urgent enough to finally start. And I want to get through the preceding material properly before I get to it. Because without the preceding material, the 4 a.m. thing is just a strange observation without weight. With it, it's something else. I don't know the right word for what it is yet. The first time I noticed it was roughly 6 weeks after we arrived at the station. I'd been keeping an informal watch schedule. I took the midnight to 5 a.m. slot most nights. Partly because my body hadn't readjusted from the overnight shift schedule, and partly because I was the only one who knew the camera feeds well enough to notice anomalies at a glance. The others rotated through the other hours. At roughly 4 a.m., on an unremarkable night in the period I'm describing as month 2, camera number 7 in my local network, mounted on a road sign pole on the county road about 3 miles north of the station, triggered its motion detector. The motion trigger was something Trish had helped me build. It was simple. A pixel change threshold in the camera software, which would flag in the monitor display when a sufficient portion of the frame changed within a defined zone. Good for detecting movement at range, even in low light, without requiring constant active monitoring. I'd set the threshold high enough that wind-moved branches and animals below a certain size wouldn't trigger it. Something moving through the camera's field at the distance of the road surface would trigger it. Camera 7 triggered. I looked at the feed. Night vision mode. IR illuminator on. The image washed in that familiar gray-green of low-light surveillance. The county road running north. Tree line on both sides. The road sign the camera was mounted on, visible at the lower right edge of frame. There was nothing in the image. The trigger had fired, and there was nothing in the image. I watched for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing moved. The trigger did not fire again. I logged it as a false positive. Strong wind, probably, or a large bird, or a sensitivity issue in the pixel change algorithm. I adjusted the threshold slightly and moved on. 3 nights later, at 4:02 a.m., camera 7 triggered again. This time I watched the feed immediately. The image was the same. County road, tree lines, empty. But I held on it, not looking away, for 20 minutes. At 4:07 a.m., there was movement at the far edge of frame, right at the limit of the IR illuminator's range, maybe 200 meters out, in the road itself. The pixel change zone flagged it in yellow on my display. I tried to zoom the feed. The camera wasn't a PTZ. It had a fixed lens, no pan/tilt zoom function. I couldn't get a better image. But what I could see in those pixels was something moving, upright, bipedal, and it was moving in a direction that was... I took a moment to orient myself, checking the camera's compass heading from my notes, moving south, toward the station. It moved through the far edge of the frame and disappeared. I sat with that for the rest of the night. Then I asked Trish to look at the footage in the morning. She watched it 3 times. She pointed at the far edge pixels. "That's a person," she said. "Or it's a very tall deer walking on its hind legs, but I think it's a person. Coming from the north. At 4 in the morning. Yeah. Infected? Moving in a straight line toward a specific destination. No deviation, no apparent response to anything in the environment, no cluster behavior." She looked at me. "You're saying it's moving with a purpose. I'm saying it's moving consistently south." At 4 a.m. We looked at each other for a while. "The original cameras went dark at 4 a.m., I said. Day 1. The configuration change executed at 3:51 a.m. The first camera dropped at 3:58 a.m. You think those are connected?" I think 4 a.m. is a significant time for whoever set this in motion. I think Maint Oversight 7 executed its command at 3:51 a.m., which means someone decided that 3:51 a.m. was the right time to execute it. That's not random. That's a chosen time. It's the dead hour, the hour when response is slowest. And now something is moving south on the county road at 4 a.m. On a road that isn't on any public map, a maintenance road, known primarily to DOT workers and infrastructure contractors. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, "What does Harlan know about this?" "I'm going to ask him." Harlan Doss had been at the station for the same duration as everyone else. He'd made himself useful in specific ways. His contractor knowledge had helped with several infrastructure questions, and he'd organized a comprehensive inventory of the facility's structural condition in month 1 that had identified a roof leak and a septic system issue before they became larger problems. He was not warm, exactly, but he wasn't hostile. He was a man carrying something and managing it by being useful and relatively quiet. When I showed him the camera footage and asked him about the movement, he watched the footage 3 times, the same as Trish. Then he was quiet for much longer than Trish had been. "What are you thinking?" I said. "I'm thinking about the people who were running the response plan," he said. "The ones I reported to." "What about them?" "The plan included what they called canary operations, monitor points, people or systems deployed ahead of the outbreak's expected spread, gathering information and reporting back." He stopped. "Reporting back to who?" "To the coordination network, which, as far as I can determine, is not operational. But the canary operations might still be running," I said, "even if the network they're reporting to isn't operational anymore." He thought about it for what felt like a long time. People running a canary operation, if they're following the protocol as written, would be maintaining a movement and observation schedule, reporting at designated times, whether or not anyone's receiving the reports. A designated time like 4 a.m. He looked at the footage again. "I don't know," he said. "That's an honest answer. I don't know. Is it possible that whoever is moving on that road is following a protocol?" "Not infected. Following a protocol they were given before this started." "It's possible," he said. "It's also possible it's a survivor who walks at night for their own reasons and doesn't know this road is there and just walks it because it's a road." "It's a maintenance road," I said. "Not on public maps." He looked at me, not saying anything. "I want to increase the camera coverage on the northern approach," I said. "And I want to add a camera that covers the direct approach to the station. If whoever that is comes closer, I want to see it before it arrives." "Good," he said. "Do it." The way I expanded the camera network, you have to understand, was not a simple process. Every camera I added required cable runs, which meant physical work along the road, during daylight hours, in areas where I might encounter infected. It required mounting hardware, which I was increasingly improvising from whatever materials were available: road sign posts, fence wire, tie wraps, weatherproof tape. Every camera added was a full day of work, sometimes more. Trish helped. Her background in electrical engineering made her more useful in this specific task than anyone else at the station, and she came with me on the cable runs. We moved carefully. We'd established by now a reasonable protocol for working in the open: 2 people minimum, 1 moving and 1 watching. Hand signals only when we were outside. No engine noise if we could avoid it. We'd also built a working picture of the infected's behavior from months of camera observation that informed how we moved. The infected did not patrol, organize, or appear to make decisions. They moved. They responded to sound, strongly and immediately, reorienting toward it. They responded to movement at close range. Visual motion seemed to draw them at distances up to about 40 or 50 feet. They did not respond to smell, or if they did, we couldn't distinguish it from other behavior. They did not coordinate with each other. When one turned toward a sound, others might follow, but only because the movement of the first infected drew the attention of nearby ones, a cascade rather than a command. They couldn't climb. They couldn't open doors. The road surfaces were the problem. They concentrated the infected along predictable routes, which were the same routes humans used, which made road-adjacent work consistently risky. The county roads near the station had lower concentrations than the highway network, but they weren't empty. The worst cable run was the one on the North Road, the 3rd camera I added to the northern approach. About 1.5 miles from the station, while I was running cable along the ditch at the road edge, Trish made the hand signal for stop. I stopped. I looked where she was looking. 50 feet down the road, 2 of them, moving south, the standard drift. They hadn't seen or heard us yet. We were in the ditch, which put us below the road surface, in shadow, not moving. We stayed still for nearly 20 minutes while those two drifted south and eventually curved off the road into a field to the west. Then we finished the cable run and walked back very fast without talking. I logged it. I almost always logged the encounters. It was a way of not letting them become just background noise. The 4 a.m. trigger happened again on the 8th night, after I'd added the second northern camera. And this time, the movement was on both cameras. Camera 7, at 3 miles north, movement at the far edge of frame, same time, same direction, south. Camera 11, at 2 miles north, which I'd added specifically for this. Approximately 30 seconds after the camera 7 trigger, a figure in the road. Closer, better resolution. Still at the edge of the IR illuminator's useful range, but better. A person, no question, from this footage. Walking, upright, with a human gait, not the particular unsynchronized movement of the infected. Carrying something, I couldn't identify what. Wearing something on the head that I thought might be a hat. Moving south, consistently south. I watched until the figure left the frame of camera 11 and should have entered the coverage zone of camera 12 at 1 mile north. Camera 12 did not trigger. I watched camera 12 for 40 minutes, nothing. At 1 mile from the station, on the north road, whoever was moving had stopped, or turned off, or gone somewhere other than the road. Or, and this is the thought that has been with me every night since, knew where the camera was and avoided it. I told the whole group about the 4 a.m. observations at a meeting in the break room the next day. I showed them the footage on the monitor. I laid out what I knew and what I didn't know, in as straightforward a way as I could. The reactions were what you'd expect. Peggy was worried. Her version of worried was very still and very attentive, her hands folded, her eyes on the monitor. Floyd was pragmatic. What do we do about it? Tim wanted to go look, wanted to find whoever it was and find out their situation. Nolan asked the right question. Do they know where we are? Brent said nothing. Harlan listened and didn't comment during the meeting itself. Trish's response was the one I found most useful. She proposed a radio experiment. On the following night, between 3:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., she would broadcast on VHF Channel 23, a channel she'd chosen partly because it was one of the ones she'd identified as carrying traffic from the west. A brief message, repeated at regular intervals. Just an identifier, and a location reference vague enough not to be directly revealing, specific enough to be meaningful to someone who knew the road network. If there's someone out there using the maintenance roads, she said, they probably have a radio. If they hear this, they have the option to respond. Or not. And if they respond, Floyd asked, then we know we're not alone on the county road. We already know that, Nolan said. The cameras show us that. We know something is moving on the county road, Trish said. That's different from knowing we're not alone in the useful sense. Trish was right about most things, and I'd stopped being surprised by it. We ran the radio experiment on the following night. She transmitted for an hour, beginning at 3:30 a.m. I watched the cameras. No response on the radio. No movement on any camera. Nothing. It's 4:41 a.m. as I write this, and I haven't slept, and the camera monitors are on the wall across from me, and camera 7 and camera 11 are showing empty road, and camera 12 has not triggered tonight. But here's the thing I want to tell you about. The specific thing that started this whole writing exercise. The thing from 3 nights ago that I keep turning over and can't find the bottom of. 3 nights ago, at 4:03 a.m., cameras 7 and 11 both triggered within 40 seconds of each other, same as before. Figure on the north road, moving south. I tracked it on camera 7, waited for camera 11, got the trigger. Watched the figure on camera 11's feed. And this time, I had a better image. I'd adjusted the camera 11 IR illuminator 2 weeks ago, moved it slightly to cover a wider field, which had the secondary effect of bringing it slightly closer to the road center, which meant better resolution on subjects in the road itself. Clearer image. Still not perfect. Still the grain of low-light IR footage, but clearer. The figure was carrying a road case of some kind. Rectangular, handled. The kind of case you'd use to transport electronic equipment. and around the figure's neck, visible as a light-catching shape in the IR, was what looked like a lanyard. A photo lanyard. The kind with a card badge on it. I know what lanyard that is. I wore one for 12 years. It's the DOT Contractor Identification Lanyard, white with the state DOT logo, and the badge is a standard government-issue photo ID card in a clear laminate holder. Whoever is walking the North Road at 4 a.m., every few nights, heading south, is carrying DOT contractor credentials. I've got to tell you what I did when I saw that. I sat very still for about 5 minutes, looking at the frozen frame on the monitor where I'd paused the footage on the clearest moment of the figure's approach. Then I went and woke up Trish. She looked at the frame for a long time. "Maint Oversight 7, she said. "I thought that," I said. "Same thing. A DOT contractor moving on maintenance roads at 4 a.m. Yeah, moving south, toward us, but stopping before camera 12, every time." She was quiet. She had a way, when she was thinking hard, of pressing her lips together and looking at a point slightly to the left of whatever she was ostensibly looking at. She did that for about a minute. "What's south of camera 12, she said. "I mean, what's south of the 1-mile mark on the North Road, if you continue past the station?" I thought about it. I knew the roads. About 4 miles south of us, there's the Route 11 interchange, which connects back to the highway. And the highway connects to everything. Yes. So whoever this is, they're moving south on the maintenance road, stopping short of a visible camera, and you don't know what they're doing after that. Right. They either know about the camera and are avoiding it, or they're stopping for another reason, and the timing with the camera is coincidental. Right. 2 possibilities. They know about your camera network, which means they're sophisticated, which opens a lot of questions. Or they stop at that location for an unrelated reason, which means there might be something at that location worth stopping at. I hadn't thought about the second option. I pulled up my notes. I keep careful notes, numbered and dated, and looked at what I'd recorded about the 1-mile mark on the North Road. Nothing distinctive. No structures visible in camera 12's feed. Road and tree line, and ditch. "I'll look at it in daylight," I said. 3 days ago I did. About a mile north of the station on the county road, set back from the road about 50 feet in the tree line, is a structure I hadn't known about. It's the kind of thing that doesn't show up on the camera feed from the road because of the angle and the tree cover. You can't see it on the monitor. But in daylight, on foot, it's visible. A square concrete structure, maybe 12 by 12, ground level, with a locked steel hatch on the top surface. A ventilation pipe, a power conduit running underground to the north. I know what this is. I've seen the type before, twice, in my 12 years of maintenance work on the highway system. It's a relay station, an underground relay station for data infrastructure, the kind that the state DOT network runs through, providing the backbone for highway systems in a region. The kind of structure that would be in the jurisdiction of a DOT network contractor. The kind of structure that, if it had power and was still operational, would connect to the broader highway camera network. I didn't open the hatch. I didn't try to. I stood at a distance and looked at it for maybe 2 minutes, and then walked back to the station. Because here's the thing. Here's the actual thing that's been sitting in my chest since I found it. If that relay is still running, it has a connection to the wider network. And if someone with network access credentials, DOT contractor credentials, were to access it, they would have the ability to push configuration changes to camera systems connected to that network. The same ability that Maint Oversight 7 used at 3:51 a.m. on the night the cameras went dark. So that's where I am. Let me just say it plainly because I've been circling around it. The person walking the North Road at 4 a.m. with DOT contractor credentials is approaching and stopping at an underground relay station that connects to the highway camera network. Every few nights, for as long as I've been watching. I don't know if this person turned the cameras off. I don't know if they're trying to turn them back on. I don't know if they know I'm here, or if they're moving on the maintenance road for reasons entirely unrelated to this station. I don't know if they're the person who left the note in the office. Stay on the high ground. The cameras can be salvaged if you have the right hardware. What I know is what the cameras have shown me, and I know how to read cameras, and I know what I've seen. I've been sitting here for the past 20 minutes with the clock reading 4:51 a.m., and outside the window, the sky is doing the pre-dawn gray thing, and the cameras are clear on all feeds, and the North Road has been empty. Except, let me look at camera 7 again. I look at it a lot. Empty road, tree line, the sign pole, the white road marking at the edge of the asphalt, quiet. I'm going to tell the group today about the relay station, about what I think the 4 a.m. movements mean. I'm going to suggest that tonight, I go to the relay station at 3:30 a.m. and wait. Nolan will say it's risky. She'll be right. Tim will want to come with me. I'll say no, because 2 people are twice as detectable as 1 person, and if this goes badly, I don't want to take Tim with me into it. Trish will think through the risk profile and calculate something she probably won't tell me the precise result of, but which will influence whatever she says. Floyd will look at Peggy, and Peggy will look at me. Harlan will say something specific and precise, and I won't know, even after months, how to fully weigh what Harlan says against what Harlan knows. And Brent will watch and be quiet. That's the plan. Tonight, 3:30 a.m., alone, North Road, relay station. If the person comes, I'll wait until I can see them clearly, and then I'll step out of the tree line. I don't know what I'll say. I've practiced a few things in my head, and they all sound wrong. Maybe I'll just say, I see you on my cameras. Maybe I'll just say, I need to know who Maint Oversight 7 is. Maybe I'll say nothing, and let them talk first. I'm going to write a little more before I try to sleep, because sleep isn't coming anyway. I want to talk about the months, the actual texture of them, not just the events. What it's like to be here, quieter than I expected, in most of the ways that count. The group has found its shape. Trish works alone, but connects with people in specific moments. She'll sit with Peggy for long stretches in the afternoon, the 2 of them talking in low voices about things I can't hear, and Peggy comes away from those conversations looking calmer. Tim and Nolan have developed a working partnership on the food supply that involves regular runs, coordinated timing, a level of trust that took most of the second month to build. Brent helps with everything, says little, and I notice he's started keeping his own notes in a notepad he found in the vehicle bay. He won't tell me what he's writing, and I don't ask. Doug Pratt is the person I talk to most, probably. He handles the medical needs of the group with the same steadiness he had from day one, using what we have carefully, and inventorying what we need. And in the gaps between those duties, he sits in the break room and drinks instant coffee, made from grounds that are well past their best quality. And we talk, not usually about anything urgent, about what things were like before, about small things. He tells me about his mother, who lived in the same house for 50 years and refused to change the curtains because she'd chosen them with his father, and the color was exactly right. I tell him about the monitoring room and the night feeds, and what the highway looks like at 3 a.m. on a clear night in winter, when the road surface catches the overhead lights in a way that makes the whole corridor look like something from a different world. He told me once, about 2 months in, that I was different from how he'd expected. I asked what he meant. He said, "You're the person who kept us together in the first days. The plan, the route, the tunnel. Without you doing that, I don't think most of us get out of the monitoring room." I said I didn't know what else to do. He said that was exactly what he meant. I've been thinking about that, about what it means to not know what else to do and still do it. Whether that's a kind of courage or just a kind of narrow vision. I couldn't see any other option, because I couldn't see past the next decision, so I made the next decision. It doesn't feel like something worth crediting yourself for. It feels like what happened. The nights are the hard part, not because of danger, mostly. The station is reasonably secure. The infected density on our roads is low. The perimeter holds. The nights are hard because of the silence and the screens, and the way watching cameras in the dark hour reconstitutes itself into the memory of sitting in the monitoring room before any of this started, watching those same roads, in that same quiet, and then the first camera going dark. I think about 3:58 a.m. a lot. The specific moment, 7 Bravo dropping, The automated alert that fired half a second after I'd already noticed it. The clean, ordinary, mundane beginning of it. I wonder sometimes if there was a way I could have acted differently in those first minutes, those first hours, and what a different action might have changed. Not for everyone. I can't think in those terms without it becoming paralyzing, but for specific people. Kyle, Donna, the 3 people we lost in the first month at the station, from things that weren't the infection, an infected encounter near the farm supply on a run I didn't go on, an unrelated medical event, a heart thing, that Doug couldn't treat, a fall. I can't fix those. I know that. But the thing about working with surveillance systems for 12 years is that you develop a specific relationship with the past, because cameras record everything, and recordings can be reviewed, and errors can be identified in retrospect, with a clarity that real-time observation doesn't permit. You spend a lot of time watching old footage and seeing exactly where something went wrong. That habit of retrospective analysis doesn't turn off when the footage is your own memory. I see where things went wrong. I see the specific moments. I don't know what to do with that information, and I don't think that's something that will resolve. I should tell you about the weird thing, the other thing, the one that isn't the 4 a.m. figure. About 6 weeks ago, on a camera that covers the Route 11 corridor about 2 miles east of the station, I recorded something that I've watched maybe 40 times and still can't explain to my own satisfaction. The camera is camera 9 in my network, standard road-mounted housing, IR illuminator, fixed field covering the Route 11 eastbound shoulder, and the road surface. At approximately 1:30 a.m., on a night in the period I'd call late month 4, the motion trigger activated. In the frame, a vehicle, moving, a white pickup truck, the kind used by DOT contractors, the kind Harlan had driven to the monitoring facility on day 1, moving west on Route 11, past the camera, consistent with someone driving to the station from the east. I immediately went to the monitor and tracked it on the next camera west, camera 8, which covers the approach to the station's main road. Camera 8 didn't trigger. The truck did not appear on camera 8. Between camera 9 and camera 8, there is a quarter-mile of Route 11. No side roads, no turn-offs, no access points that I haven't covered with cable or barrier. A vehicle on the road between those 2 cameras should appear on camera 8 within about 30 seconds. It didn't. The truck appeared on camera 9 and stopped existing. I reviewed the footage from camera 9 again, very carefully, frame by frame. The truck moved through the frame at a consistent speed, headlights on, headlights, which means someone was driving it, not coasting. It had dot markings visible on the door panel. The license plate was not readable in the IR footage, the angle too oblique. There was a person visible in the driver's seat, upper body, impossible to distinguish features. I showed it to Trish. She watched it a dozen times. Could the camera 8 feet have dropped during that window? She said. I checked. No, camera 8 was live, and the motion trigger was armed, and it did not fire. So the vehicle disappeared between 2 camera positions with no turn-offs between them. She was very quiet for a long time. Is it possible there's an access point you don't know about? Underground access, like the relay station. I've thought about it. There's no documentation of any underground structure on that stretch of Route 11. But, as I've now established, not everything is in the standard documentation. It's possible, I said. But you don't think so? No. What do you think? I've been honest about what I think because there's no value in not being honest about it. I think whatever is happening on these roads at night is organized in ways I don't fully understand yet. I think whoever is moving out there has knowledge of the infrastructure that equals or exceeds mine. I think the camera shutdown, the relay station, the 4 a.m. movements, and the vanishing truck are all part of a connected thing, and the connected thing has a center that I haven't found yet. And I think the note on the desk, stay on the high ground, the cameras can be salvaged, is part of it too. Whether as a warning or an invitation, I don't know. Here's what Harlan told me. On the night I showed him the truck footage. He watched it once. He sat back. He said, without leading up to it, I need to tell you about the Canary Protocol in more detail. Okay, I said. The monitoring designations. The cameras that were shut down first. There was a logic to the sequence. They were shut down in an order that would leave certain corridor cameras live longer than others. I noticed a pattern, I said. The remaining live cameras were concentrated in specific geographic pockets. The pockets weren't random. They were designated observation zones. The idea was that leaving cameras live in those zones would allow the coordination network to track outbreak spread without revealing that the network was monitoring. The public-facing explanation would be equipment failure. The actual function was intelligence gathering, watching which way it spread. Yes. And the canary operations. The people deployed ahead of the spread. They were positioned to report through the relay stations. Because relay stations have network connectivity, even when the primary DOT network is disrupted. The relay stations were designed as hardened infrastructure, specifically for emergency use. I looked at him for a long time. You're telling me that whoever is going to the relay station at 4 a.m. is following a protocol that was built into the response plan. Reporting through the relay? Possibly. And the coordination network they're reporting to may or may not still be receiving, he said. I don't know. I've told you I don't know if anything is still operational. But someone is still following the protocol, which means someone was given this protocol and trained in it and hasn't stopped following it even if the thing they're reporting to has stopped listening. That's one interpretation. What's another? He looked at the truck footage on the monitor. Another interpretation is that the protocol was never abandoned, that the coordination network is operational, and we simply don't have access to it. That what's happening out there is a managed operation that we're observing from outside. Managed, that word. I sat with it. If that's true, I said, then someone is managing this region, moving at night, using maintenance infrastructure, staying below the observable horizon of the camera network I've built. Yes. And they've been aware of us, aware of this station, since at least the time I put cameras on the North Road. If they're sophisticated enough to avoid your cameras, yes. I thought about the note. Stay on the high ground. Is that a warning? I said. Or is it instructions? Harlan looked at me. He had the expression again, the one I'd been trying to name since day one. I think, now, that the right name for it is the expression of a man who knows something is inevitable and has spent a long time deciding whether to hurry it along or let it arrive on its own schedule. I don't know, he said, and that's the most honest thing I've said to you. I have 4 hours until I go to the relay station. I should sleep. I'm not going to sleep. Let me tell you about the last thing that happened before I started writing this down. The specific last thing, 2 nights ago, that pushed me from watching and noting and logging into actually sitting down and committing this to paper. 2 nights ago, at 4:14 a.m., camera 7 triggered. Figure on the North Road, same as before, moving south. I tracked it. Camera 11 triggered. Clear image of the figure, better than I'd ever gotten. The IR doing its job. The shape of the person distinct in the frame. The figure stopped in the road, exactly in the middle of the camera 11 frame. Stopped and turned to face the camera. They knew where the camera was. They stopped in front of it deliberately and turned to face it. And they raised one hand. Not a wave, not in the casual sense. Deliberate. A slow raise of the right hand, palm forward, held for several seconds. The kind of gesture that means, I see you. And then they walked south, into the coverage zone of camera 12, which I'd expected them to avoid. Camera 12 triggered. I tracked the figure all the way to the edge of camera 12's frame, to the point where the road approaches the station's access road. And then I switched to the exterior camera I'd mounted on the vehicle bay roof, which covers the station approach, and I watched. Nothing came. No figure at the gate. No sound outside. Nothing. I held on that feed for 2 hours. Nothing came. When daylight came, I went out and walked the approach road. The gravel was disturbed in a place about 200 feet from the gate. Footprints. 2 of them. Someone had walked to that point, stopped, and there were no prints continuing forward, and no prints going back. There were, in the softer gravel at the edge of the road, what looked like a turn and a step into the grass, where the prints became too faint to follow. They'd come to within 200 feet of the station, stopped, gone around. Tonight is the night I go to them. I've been a watcher my whole working life, and then a watcher under circumstances that made watching a survival skill. And now, I'm going to stop watching and go stand in a tree line at 3:30 a.m. and wait for something that knows I'm watching to come to me. The thing I know about cameras, after all these years, they tell you everything that happens in their field of view. They're a perfect record of the visible, within range. They can't tell you what's outside the frame. They can't tell you what's behind something. They can't interpret motive or meaning. They show you behavior and leave the interpretation to the person watching. I've been watching. I have the behavior. The interpretation is what's been missing. Tonight, I'm going to try to get it. I want to end this account at the moment I leave the station tonight, but I find I can't stop yet, because there's one more thing I want to put down before this night gets any further along. The image on camera 7 right now, at 4:51 a.m., the sky beginning to go gray, empty road. Tree line, sign pole, the camera is working, the feed is live, the IR illuminator is on, casting its flat gray light onto the asphalt. I've watched this camera so many times that I've begun to see things in it the way you see things in a room you know perfectly. The small changes, the slight variations. The way the tree canopy shifts when wind is coming from the northwest versus the southwest. The way the road surface has a specific reflectivity at different temperatures. The way the left edge of the frame is always fractionally darker because of the angle of the pole. Tonight, that left edge of the frame is different. Not dramatically. Not enough to trigger the motion detector. Just different. The darkness at the left edge has a shape that wasn't there an hour ago. I've been staring at it for 4 minutes. It could be a branch. Wind can move things. It could be a shadow change from the pre-dawn light shift. It could be nothing. It has the shape of a person standing very still at the edge of frame. If someone is standing at the edge of camera 7's field right now, they would be standing at the exact limit of the camera's range, in the tree line to the left of the road, at a distance of approximately 200 meters from the camera pole. They would be facing the camera. They've been there, if they're there, for at least 4 minutes, and in 4 minutes, I've been unable to determine with certainty whether it's a person or a branch. That's the problem with cameras. That's always been the problem with cameras. The image is perfect within its limitations, and completely silent about everything outside them. You can watch and watch and watch, and the screen gives you only what it gives you, and the meaning is yours to determine, and sometimes you can't. I'm going to get up from this desk now. I'm going to put on my jacket and my boots. I'm going to pick up the flashlight from the charger and the hand radio from the hook and walk north on the county road. And if there's someone standing at the edge of camera 7's frame, they'll see me coming long before I see them. They've had better visibility this whole time. They've been operating in the blind spots, the gaps between cameras, the places I can't see. That's fine. I know how to work in the dark. 12 years on the overnight shift, and you learn one thing above everything else. The dark is where the real information is. In the daylight hours, you see surfaces, you see traffic, you see the normal function of the highway. At night, in the empty hours, you see the structure beneath it, the cables and the conduits and the nodes and the connections. The dark shows you what holds things together. I'm going north. If whoever has been walking that road wants to be found, tonight they're going to be found. And if they don't, I'm a technician. I know how to run a diagnostic. It's 5:07 a.m. I'm going now. The clock on the wall says 5:07. It's accurate. I reset it from the GPS last Tuesday, and I've been keeping it wound, and I trust it. I trust it the same way I trusted the camera feeds in the monitoring room before any of this started, as a tool that gives me the closest approximation to accurate information that's available to me in this situation. Outside the maintenance station, on the county road, the pre-dawn is doing what pre-dawn does. Lightening without warming, the particular gray that has no color in it yet, and somewhere out there, on the north road, between the tree lines, on a stretch of road I've been watching for months, something is either present or not present. I'm going to find out which. The cameras can't tell me this one. I didn't write anything more that night. This is 2 days later, and I'm going to tell you what happened, and then I'm going to stop, because I'm not sure I know how to continue after what happened, and I think I need to sit with it for a while before I try to make it into a coherent thing. At 5:14 a.m., walking north on the county road with a flashlight I'd kept off until the relay station was in sight, I came to the tree line at the 1-mile mark and stepped into it. I pushed through maybe 20 feet of brush and pine and came to the concrete structure, the relay station hatch, still closed, locked with the padlock I'd found it with. Except it wasn't locked. The shackle was pushed closed but not clicked. I stood there in the pre-dawn, listening. Behind me, 30 feet into the trees, road noise was completely gone. The station sounds were gone. Just the brush and the slight wind and, underneath it, a faint sound that I spent a long time identifying. A low hum, electrical. The relay was running. I took the hatch handle and pulled. Stairs going down, 8 of them, lit by a single LED strip that went from red to green when the hatch opened. A presence sensor. At the bottom, a space about the size of a walk-in closet. Equipment racks on 2 walls, a stool, and sitting on the stool, with a laptop open on a fold-down shelf, a woman in a state DOT jacket with an identification lanyard around her neck. She looked up at me when I came down the stairs. She wasn't surprised. She'd known I was coming. She said, "Dale Whitfield, camera technician level 3. She knew my name. "You've been watching my cameras," I said. "Your cameras," she said, with what I think was the beginning of a smile, quickly contained. "Technically, they're state property." "What are you doing down here?" She turned the laptop to face me. The screen showed a feed array, not my 14 cameras, 40, maybe 50 feeds, from all over the region. Highway cameras, interstate cameras. The feeds I'd watched go dark on the night of day 1. "They're not all dark," I said. "No," she said, "not all of them. About 60% came back online when the configuration was reset." She paused. "I reset it." "When?" "About 8 weeks ago, from here. The relay has network access to the primary DOT backbone, and the backbone still has connectivity in the regions where the infrastructure wasn't physically damaged." She looked at me steadily. "I've been monitoring the feeds since then, watching the roads." I sat down on the floor, not because I was weak, just because standing didn't feel like the right posture for what was happening. "Who are you?" I said. "My name is Renata. I was a network administrator for the DOT contractor group that managed the highway camera system. I was the one who flagged Maint Oversight 7 as anomalous 18 months ago." She paused. The flag was overridden. The account stayed active. I was told to stop asking about it. She said it the same way Brent Calloway had said almost exactly the same thing. The flat voice of someone who's had months to process, not having pushed harder. When it executed the shutdown on day 1, I was already here. I'd been positioned here 2 weeks earlier as part of what I was told was a monitoring protocol. I was told the account was being used for a legitimate observation exercise. But it wasn't. "I don't know what it was for," she said. "I genuinely don't. And that's what I've been trying to find out from here, from these feeds, for the past 2 months. And?" She looked at the feed array on her laptop. "The cameras in the active zone show what you'd expect. Infected distribution, road conditions, scattered survivor activity. You can see your station on this feed, by the way." She pointed at a small image in the upper right of the array. My station, the vehicle bay, the garden plot. She'd been watching us for 2 months. "But some of the feeds," she continued, "show things that don't fit the outbreak pattern. Movement in areas that should be fully compromised. Vehicle traffic, not random wandering. Directed movement, on the highway network, in the early morning hours. 4 a.m. "The same people," I said, "using the highways. Regularly, consistently, following routes." She tapped the laptop. "I've been mapping them. The routes converge, southeast of here, about 40 miles, at the highway junction near Millbrook. Millbrook, Floyd and Peggy Hatcher's town, the Route 19 corridor, where 7 Bravo went dark first. Who are they? I said. That's the question I need to answer, she said. And I need someone who knows this camera network the way you do. The feeds I'm recovering are fragmentary. I need field-level knowledge to fill the gaps. I need to know what I'm not seeing. I looked at her for a long time. This woman in the tree line at 5 a.m., with a laptop full of highway camera feeds and a theory about organized movement in a supposedly collapsed region, who'd been watching my station for 2 months without identifying herself. Why didn't you just come to the gate? I said. She hesitated. I wasn't sure what you'd do. We've got food, I said. We've got a garden and a bow hunter and a retired EMT. We'd have given you dinner. She looked at me with an expression that I don't have a good word for. Something like relief, but older than relief. The way relief looks when someone has been waiting a long time for the thing they needed and have stopped expecting it to come. I had to know you were stable first, she said. I had to watch long enough to know that you weren't going to. She stopped. I know, I said. You needed data before you could trust the observation. Yes, that's what I do too. She nodded. Come to the station, I said. Tell Harlan Doss everything you know about Maint Oversight 7, and then tell me what you see on those feeds. She closed the laptop. Okay. We walked back to the station in the early morning light, which by then had acquired some color, the pale washed yellow of an overcast sunrise. The county road was empty. The cameras, I knew, were watching us the whole way back. That was 2 days ago. Renata is at the station now. She and Harlan have been talking for most of those 2 days, and I've been in and out of those conversations, and what I've learned is enough to fill another account as long as this one, maybe longer, and I'm not ready to write all of it yet. What I can say, the movement on the feeds, the vehicles in the early morning hours, the routes converging on Millbrook, there are people out there who are not survivors in the way we're survivors. They're not just making it through. They're moving with intent, using the highway network, using the infrastructure I spent 12 years maintaining. Whether they're an organized survival group or something with a larger structure, I don't know yet. Whether the Maint Oversight 7 account, whoever ran it, whoever decided that day 1 was the day to execute the configuration change, whether those people are part of what's moving on the feeds at 4 a.m., I don't know yet. Whether staying on the high ground, the way the note said, is still the right strategy, or whether Millbrook 40 miles to the southeast is somewhere we need to go, I don't know yet. What I know is what I've always known. You watch. You gather data. You notice anomalies. You log the time. The clock says 5:43 a.m. The feeds are clear. 14 cameras, all live, all showing me the world inside a 6-mile radius of this station. Renata's laptop shows me a different world, wider, stranger, less legible. 50 cameras across 200 miles of highway, showing me a pattern I don't fully understand yet. Traffic that shouldn't exist in a region that should be silent. Movement that suggests coordination. Every night at 4 a.m., I watch the roads. Some nights the roads are empty and the motion triggers stay quiet, and the clock ticks through 4 o'clock and 4:01 and 4:02, and nothing happens. And I drink cold instant coffee and I think about the sequence of things, and I wait for dawn. Some nights the cameras show me something I don't have a category for. Tonight I'm going to sit with Renata and watch her feeds, and try to map the convergence point at Millbrook, and try to understand what the camera that was first to go dark in this whole thing has to do with what's moving on these roads in the pre-dawn hour. 7 Bravo, Route 19 southbound, the first one to go dark, at 3:58 a.m. on the night the world changed. Renata told me yesterday that camera 7 Bravo is on her recovered feed list. It came back online 6 weeks ago when she reset the configuration. What it's showing, in the current live feed from Route 19 southbound, an empty road, an overpass, a clear night sky at the upper edge of frame, and in the distance, just at the limit of the camera's range, at the edge of what the IR illuminator can reach, lights. Not headlights, stationary lights, the kind a structure uses, arranged in the pattern that structures use, regular and intentional and warm. Somebody, 40 miles up the highway, has the lights on. Every night, at 4 a.m., I watch to see if they move.